Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Minka Guides. This month, we are talking about asexuality with Cody Daigle Orions. How are you doing today, Cody?
I'm good. I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, yeah, not doing too bad. So Cody is a queer, asexual writer and educator who's in his mid 40s and is based in Hartford, Connecticut. And Cody is the creator of Ace Dad Advice, which is a wonderful and very popular online platform which you can find on YouTube and Instagram and TikTok, which he creates videos talking about asexuality that's specifically for younger people who feel they're not sure about their identity around this yet. So I think to start with, I think some people don't really have a clear idea about what asexuality is and maybe some of the labels around it, such as ace or grey ace and stuff like that. So would you mind just kind of giving a brief insight into what that identity is about?
Sure. So, asexuality is a sexual orientation that includes people who do not or regularly or do not or rarely experience sexual attraction.
Mhm.
So, asexual folks, there's a wide range of experience under that definition. There are folks who just identify as ace who never really experience sexual attraction. There's a whole spectrum. There gray ace folks, as you mentioned earlier, are folks who sometimes experience sexual attraction, but it's a rare experience. Other
Mhm.
folks, like demisexual folks, only experience sexual attraction when they have developed a close personal connection with someone, but otherwise they don't. Um, all of those various experiences, plus a whole host of micro labels, which explain more specific experiences to sexual attraction and also sexual activity, exist under this asexual spectrum. But the thing that really holds the whole spectrum together is the not experiencing or rarely experiencing sexual attraction.
Okay, great. And so the use of the word ace is just a shortened way of saying it. Is that correct?
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
cool.
Ace is just shortened for asexual.
Which is great because I love the whole ace dad thing because it gives you this whole like I'm so cool, I'm that ace dad, I'm a cool dad.
That has been like a little like being a cool dad has kind of been like a vibe that I've had a lot of throughout my life. So yeah, it's very fun being ace dad.
So talking about your life, could you kind of give us an insight into what your journey into identifying as asexual has been and how you came about to create ace dad advice?
Yeah, sure. So I didn't really come out as asexual until I was in my early 40s. I was
Mhm.
42. I originally came out as queer. My first identification label was gay. That I came out as gay when I was 18, and gay was just an identity that fit. It was the closest thing that fit. I knew it wasn't quite right, but that was kind of the closest thing that I had to understand how I was experiencing the world. I didn't have access to the language of asexuality or information about it. Um, but then I met my husband a little over 10 years ago, and he's a bit younger than me. And during our time together, he introduced me to Tumblr. And through hanging out on Tumblr, I spent a lot of time in sort of the queer side of Tumblr. And that's when I started to really encounter a lot of asexual people describing their experiences, learning more about asexuality. And through that experience on Tumblr, I started to recognize in stories about asexuality, I was really seeing my own experience.
Wow.
And so that was where I started to identify as asexual. And that, as I said, that happened, just a few years ago in my early 40s when I turned 42.
Mhm.
Um, for several years, I just sort of existed as an asexual person, not really making much of a big deal about it. But maybe 2 years ago, I was encouraged by my barber to download TikTok and like play around on TikTok, and so I did, and I made a random day. I made a TikTok where I identified myself as asexual, and all of a sudden, I started to get a ton of messages and comments from young asexual folks saying things like, "Wow, I've never seen somebody asexual who looks like you. I didn't know there were ace adults. I didn't know, you could be ace and be old." Which, for a lot of the really
And
young
you're
folks,
like, thanks.
yeah, like, comparatively, sure. Um, and I recognized in that there was maybe a space or maybe a need for there to be sort of like mentor figures, educator figures in the ace space, having older ace folks talk about their experience and talk about asexuality, because mentors exist in other queer communities too. And
Exactly.
so that's how Ace Dad was born. It was an opportunity to sort of teach and provide not just education but also encouragement and empowerment and confidence building for young ace people who are young people who are questioning their sexuality.
It's so interesting what you say about language and how language has evolved, and how that's particularly for someone else who's also in their 40s, seeing how my identities have shaped and shifted with how society and the language around different identities has evolved as well.
Mhm.
Because back in the 90s, when I was a teenager, there was no language around like stuff around gender. So as someone who's
Mhm.
genderqueer, it took me a really long time to kind of feel my way into those identities. And like back then it was literally like you're either gay, straight, or bisexual, and you were just like
Yeah.
trying to put on a hat that you knew didn't really
Right.
fit, but you're like,
Absolutely.
I've just got to choose one. Whereas now these days there is this beautiful spectrum that we can, be like feel our way through kind of what those options are. But it is astounding how much people think that these identities are just for younger people, and that this is something that everybody who's older, don't identify with at all.
Yeah, and that what's been very interesting, because really before I the same, I really had only access to a very small number of labels and a small number of identities because that's just what we had access to.
Yeah.
But the internet has exploded that, and now. And what's also been great about the internet too is that through the work that I've done and just through engaging and being openly ace, I'm meeting a lot of other ace people who are my age and
Oh,
other ace folks who have always felt this way and have always known this is who they were, but they were just never very public about it or never really found spaces where they were sharing it. So
mm,
it isn't asexuality does get accused often of being like a thing the kids do, and that's just not true. There are many adults who are my age and also older. There are asexual folks in their 50s, 60s, 70s
mm,
who are part of this community and have been living this experience for their whole lives too. We're it's not just like an invention of the kids. What
mm.
has changed is that access to information has evolved and grown, and there are now online spaces where we can connect and find each other.
Yeah, which is incredible. And it's funny because I think the first time I was even exposed to any idea around asexuality, even in some sense of it, was I remember being in a gay club about 15 years ago, and I was with some friends, and this very beautiful man walked in, and one of my friends was like, I'm going to go and talk to him. And he came back a few minutes later with this very puzzled look on his face. And he was like, so the guy says that he's gay, but he's not into sex. And we were all just like, what? And
Right.
we're like, oh, okay, how does that work? And so it's amazing how, like, even within the space of a decade or a bit more, that we've come to understand so much more about the way that all of us can be in a whole spectrum in regards to stuff around sex.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I feel so grateful to be in the like not just to be in the position I am because it's a cool position, but also because it's helped me understand my experience so much more
Yes.
deeply. Back in the day, in the mid '90s when I was like first going out and being like, I was that guy. I was that guy at the gay bar who knew he was gay. I was interested in men and I wanted to be romantic with them, but sex wasn't really a high priority for me.
Yeah.
And I always felt like that just meant I was a bad gay, or there was something wrong with me and the way that like expressing queerness. And
Mm,
what such to me like beyond just being able to connect an identity with yourself, what I think has been so beautiful about like watching people gain access to like the language of asexuality when they never had it before and it fits them, is it just corrects their idea that they're broken. And
mm,
watching people move from I feel like I'm broken, I feel like there's something wrong with me, to I'm not broken. There's nothing wrong with me. There's a language for it. There's a community of people that share how I feel. Watching that process for people is a really beautiful thing, and
mm.
it's one of my favorite things about the project is sort of like being part of the process of helping people recognize that they're not broken, that you're not
Yes,
broken, you're not there's nothing wrong with you.
absolutely.
It's ace is a thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And because our society loves binaries, I think it's really good to talk about what the other side of that binary is that most people wouldn't realize. They would just think that being sexual is the norm
Mhm.
without realizing that there is a term for that, which is allosexual. And that's correct,
Yes.
isn't it? Yeah.
Yes.
And so, is there a particular definition of what being allosexual means, as opposed not wanting to see it as an opposite to asexual, but rather than looking at it as a spectrum? But if someone is to see themselves as allosexual, which is what we thoughtlessly just see as the norm in society, is there a particular definition for what that is?
Yeah, allosexual just anyone who experiences sexual attraction regularly, I guess would be.
Mm-hmm.
And when I talk about like sort of like sexual orientations, I often discuss it as like thinking about patterns of experience. So, for asexual for folks, you don't or rarely experience sexual attraction, and that's like a pattern of experience that you have over time. And for
Mm-hmm.
allosexual folks, it's the opposite. If you are regularly experiencing sexual attraction for other people, it could be towards someone of the same gender, someone of more of a different gender, multiple genders, all genders. If that is your regular pattern of experience over time, then that sort of fits you in allosexual. um, but there's within allosexuality, there's a wide variety of experiences, just as there's a wide variety of experiences within asexuality too.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what I thought it might be good to do is some myth busting, because I think there's a lot of not great, preconceptions about asexuality. So, one of the first ones, this is one I hear a lot, is that if you're asexual, you can't have an identity other than of another sexuality. You are just asexual. You can't be gay. You can't be straight. You can't be anything else.
Busted. No, not true. you know Identity language and identity, like the concepts of identities, are broad and inclusive. So, being asexual it just talks about your experience to sexual attraction, and there could be a lot of different things in there, but you still can have other attractions. You can have romantic orientations, who you want to have romantic relationships with. And even as an asexual person, you can still enjoy sex. Like, you can be a sex favorable ace person. So even if you are asexual, you still could have an understanding of what your sort of like your the realm and spectrum of sexual behavior is like for you. So as I'm asexual, I don't experience sexual attraction, but I am sex favorable. And so my sexual activity, it would be gay. So I could say that I'm like an asexual and gay. Both of those things would be true. And that works for other labels too. It can describe how you have sex if you do. It can describe how you fall in love, what your romantic orientations are. I think if whatever words best describe you, smack them together and use them.
Yeah.
That's what those words are for. They're to help us talk about ourselves and find other people who are like us.
Yeah, absolutely. So the next one is, and I think you've kind of already covered this, but if you're asexual, you don't like sex or any form of physical intimacy.
Not true. There's a whole range of relationships you can have to physical intimacy and also sex. Asexuality just talks about your relationship to attraction, but there are a lot of other reasons other than being sexually attracted to someone that can make you want to have sex. You can have it just because you physically enjoy it. It can be, and it's enjoyable. It could just be something you choose to do with your partner to express another attraction to them. For those who are able to have kids, it could be you're having sex to create a family with your partner or partners. All of those reasons are valid. So asexuality doesn't mean no sex, no touching, no intimacy. You can enjoy all of those things and still be ace. There are lots of ways to express intimacy and enjoy intimacy as an asexual person.
Great. Next one is you can't be polyamorous and asexual, which I love the video that you put online. I just saw with your husband and your boyfriend, and I was just like, oh, they're so cute.
You busted again. You can absolutely be polyamorous. Yeah, asexual people can enter into really any kind of relationship structure that exists. Um, Sex isn't the only reason that we enter relationships. We enter relationships for a lot of different reasons, and if you are a naturally polyamorous person, you can have more than one partner and still be asexual. I have two romantic partners, and my husband. I'm married to my husband Neil. I have a romantic partner Scott. And my husband Neil has a romantic partner Dan, who in a lot of ways is sort of like another partner for me, where we sort of talk about it as like we're kind of queer platonic is sort of
Yeah.
the way that we sort of talk about our relationship. And the
Yeah.
four of us together are this polyamorous unit. We call it the constellation, which is we just love it. And also because Scott's an astrophysicist, so we
Oh,
thought it was
right.
like cool. Um, but yeah, being asexual, I'm the only asexual one in the bunch. All
Okay.
of the other boys are allosexual, and
Mhm.
that doesn't preclude me from being successful in my relationships with my partners. You know, every relationship is a negotiation of boundaries and wants and needs and yeses and nos. The same thing applies for all of our relationships too.
Yeah.
Being asexual doesn't knock me out of the running for that.
Good, good. Next one is that if you are asexual, you will have to have this identity forever.
No, and like no identity falls under that
Yeah.
guideline. You know, human beings are incredibly complicated, and human sexuality is really complicated, and we change and grow over time. So
Mm.
anybody, ace or allo, can through their lives find that their experience of sexual attraction maybe may change. So maybe now someone is asexual 5 years down the road, that experience might change as they do. And it's
Mm.
okay to pick up language that works for you now and then change that language later when something different is true for you. Um, we can you imagine having just be stuck with one choice you made when you're 18? What a
Yes.
nightmare. Like what a nightmare that would be.
Exactly.
We're I think human beings are just far too complicated to expect us to only be one thing forever.
Exactly.
And it's like
Exactly.
to me that's like the beauty of identity, and especially identity language. We can
Mm.
use the words that work for us and we can discard them when they don't anymore. And
Exactly.
that's how it should be.
Mm. I recently went on a couple of dates with someone who was like, I'm just feeling like I'm in a bit of an asexual place at the moment. And I was like, that's cool.
Yeah.
What does that look like for you? And it made me really interested as to whether that was something uh, the asexual community as a whole feels about people maybe sometimes using that label temporarily or, picking it up, putting it down kind of thing.
I think it sort of depends on who you talk to. You know, like
Yeah.
there's and I think this is true in all communities. There are some folks who get very nervous about, like not ace people being in the ace community because
Hmm.
there's some fear about that. They have, I think as an asexual person, if your experience has been that allosexual people have, made you feel terrible about yourself, and when you've had really bad experiences, you want to make sure the spaces you were in are safe. And so I
Mm.
can understand that. But I really think our community should be as open as possible, because, if someone is feeling like the language of asexuality and the experience of asexuality is what they're experiencing, who am I
Mm.
to say they're not?
Exactly.
Um, and I think if the best thing that we can do is create open spaces that are inclusive to as many people as possible and support people as much as we possibly can, because it's kind of tough to move through the world not experiencing sexual attraction when the whole world, it feels like the whole rest of the world does.
Yes.
So creating always opting for inclusivity as opposed to gatekeeping just feels right to me. um, but there's people will feel differently based on their own personal experiences.
Yes, and I'm not expecting you to be the voice of the asexual
Yeah.
community for everybody, like
Oh yeah, no, like there are a bunch of people who will totally disagree with me on a ton of things. Yeah. And that's great. That's how it should be.
Exactly, exactly. The next one is if you're asexual, you don't like hearing about sex or seeing it in TV and films.
Not always true. There's a whole identity label that is specifically describes people who enjoy sort of like consuming media that includes sex, or like thinking about it, fantasizing about it, but don't want to have sex. That label is agosexual, which a lot of people respond. Anytime I've created content around agosexuality, a ton of people were like, "That's me. Something that describes me." um, yeah, you can have a comfort level with sexual content and not feel comfortable with sex itself, or you can have comfort with consuming sexual things, or like writing erotica or consuming erotica, watching porn, enjoying all of that stuff, or fantasizing without actually wanting to do it or without experiencing sexual attraction.
Okay, wow, cool. If you're asexual, no one will want to date you or have a relationship with you, which I think you
Well,
just
I have
disproved.
2 feet right. Well, I've got people who will disagree. No, I certainly think that's a misconception that lives out there, and I think that that has a ton to do with a concept called allonormativity, the idea that everyone is allosexual and everyone wants sex, and that's a compulsory sexuality too, that everyone wants and needs sex in their lives, and so people assume that an asexual person that won't be possible, so a relationship can't exist. Not true. As I said before, every relationship, no matter who's in it, is a negotiation of terms, and you have to decide between you and your partner or partners what's on the table, what isn't, how you're going to navigate your individual needs, and how you will both meet each other's needs, or how you will get your needs met. Um, and asexual people are as capable and open and available to that as any other allosexual person. So no, we can be in relationships and actually be pretty good at it. My husband and I have been almost married for 10 years. So, yeah, like we can still be good at it. Yeah.
Okay, and the last myth we want to bust is that if you're asexual, you can't dress sexy or act sexy.
Busted. Not true at all. One of, not one of, I would say like the most important asexual activist in our community, and really like one of the leader voices in our community, is Yasmin Benoit, and she is a lingerie model, and she embodies this idea that just because you're asexual, it doesn't mean you have to like shut yourself off from certain kinds of self-expression in your dress or in how you move through the world. I think Yasmin's work is not, and that's not the only thing that she does that's wonderful. She's doing a wonderful research project now
Wow,
for asexual rights in the UK. But
awesome.
that's it's she's a living embodiment that's a myth. You can express yourself in any way that you want, regardless of being asexual. Being ace doesn't limit us. We can like have whatever life we want and still be ace. It doesn't. We don't suddenly become sort of like personalityless, genderless, like lifeless people just because we don't experience sexual attraction.
Mm, absolutely. That's awesome. Okay, one of the things I was really interested in is, as an allosexual person, how can we be really good allies to people who are asexual, particularly within the queer community, where, because there's so much focus from the outside world on our sexualities, like it can be seen as something that's very, like, as you said, allonormative, and how can we actually be way more inclusive of asexual people within our spaces or in our everyday lives?
Yeah, well, I think like the first thing is that being aware, like listening and being aware, just being aware that ace people exist, particularly in queer communities. That's great. Include us in the list when if this is a queer friendly space, include ace people in the list of identities that are welcome in that queer inclusive space. Um, and I think like on an individual level, the listening is the most important thing. When ace folks enter your life, recognizing that asexuality is a wide spectrum of experiences. So me as an asexual person will have a very different experience of aceness as the literally the asexual person standing next to me. So
Mm,
a great way to be a good ally is to listen to the ace folks in your life, explain how it works for them and what they're comfortable with and what don't make assumptions about like, oh, they're ace, so we can't have any sexual content or we can't talk about sex. That's not necessarily true.
yeah.
Approaching each ace person in your life as a full complex person is the best way to be an ally. um, you know in any space, especially if you're in a space where you have a voice, a queer space when you have a voice, or any space really, not just queer spaces. When you are advocating for equitable time and space for queer people, include ace people in that. That's we're part of the community too, and it's great to have more allies thinking about us and including us in the conversation when we're talking about lesbian, gay, bi, trans folks, pan folks, intersex folks. Um,
Everyone under the umbrella.
Everyone under the umbrella, yeah, and just making sure that ace folks are being included in that, and especially if you're in sort of a position of power, if you're putting together a panel of queer folks, see if you can find somebody ace to share their experience. That's an interesting perspective to add to the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm very excited that you have a book coming out in January called
Yeah,
I Am Ace, which I just
yeah,
love the title. Tell us
yeah.
more about your book.
So it's basically a book version of the Ace Dad Advice Project. It's aimed at YA young adult readers, so mostly like high school up into college, that kind of hitting that time when people are figuring themselves out mostly. But it explores what asexuality is. It explores how to know if you're ace, advice on coming out, advice on dealing with relationships, advice on sort of existing inside the larger queer community, and it's meant to educate and empower and make someone, as the subtitle of the book is, advice on living your best ace life, and like that's what the book aims to do. So for anybody ace or anybody who's questioning, hopefully what this book will do is give them the tools and the information and the encouragement to live their aceness in the best way they can. And it
Fantastic.
was,
It
yeah,
sounds
it was
great.
such a fun. I'm very excited about the book coming out. I can't wait till people can actually read it. It was really fun to work on.
Amazing. It sounds great. So people can find out more about the book on your website. Is that correct?
Yes, yes,
And
absolutely. So yeah,
what
Ace
is your
Dad
website?
Advice, acedadadvice.com. You can find
Perfect.
information about the book and all the other things that I'm doing online.
And where else can people find you online, such as TikTok and YouTube?
Yeah, you pretty much, you get anywhere you search Ace Dad Advice on the social media platforms, you'll find me. I'm mostly on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. If you look
Mhm.
for Ace Dad Advice on any of those platforms, there'll be video content and other kinds of content as well. There's also there's an advice column on my website that answers a bunch of Ace related questions. So you can find me in any of those places.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Cody. I think this has been really wonderfully enlightening to kind of just kind of hear your perspective about all the different facets of asexuality. And yeah, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, thank you. This was a blast. Thank you so much.